Hey there! In this month's edition of The New Scientist dated July 17, 2021, there was an article that looked at the importance of stretching for your health. It explores how historically squatting benefits the body, and how sedentary lifestyle of sitting down affects the body. The flexibility of the body to stretch to extremes should be managed cautiously as it can lead to hypermobility and physical problems. If you are looking for more fascinating information on the stretching, continue listening on as we go through the article. Stretching the point. I bend so I don't break. No one knows who first coined this phrase, but search for it online, and you will find it accompanying numerous pictures of yogis in various states of contortion. Flexibility, according to common wisdom, is not only impressive to look at, but something we should actively work towards. Scientifically, however, the question of whether we should stretch to become more flexible has been difficult to answer. Assumptions about the benefits of stretching to prevent sports injuries and greater flexibility being better for our overall physical fitness hadn't been confirmed by studies. Does it matter if you can't touch your toes, let alone do the splits? Even in sports science, where most of the research has been conducted, there has been little agreement. In recent years, though, answers have started to emerge. The surprising outcome is that, while stretching may well be good for us, it is for reasons that have nothing to do with being able to get your leg behind your head. One thing is for sure, stretching feels good, particularly after a long spell of being still. We aren't the only species to have worked this out, as anyone with a dog or cat will know. Many animals take a deep stretch after lying around. This kind of stretching, called pandiculation, is so common in nature that some have suggested it evolved as a reflex to wake up the muscles after a spell of stillness. Pandiculation aside, other species don't seem to spend any time maintaining and extending their range of motion. Which raises the question, is there any reason why we should? Our flexibility is controlled by the tissues of our musculoskeletal system, which determine the maximum range that our joints can move. For a long time, flexibility has been considered a key component of physical fitness, along with cardiovascular endurance, muscle strength, and body composition. The percentage of body weight which is muscle, fat, and bone, by groups such as the American College of Sports Medicine. Its latest guidelines, for example, recommend stretching all the major muscles groups at least 2 or 3 times a week, holding the stretch for anywhere from 10 seconds to 1 minute. But even for exercise phobes, there are good reasons to stretch. Our species is unique in having invented a way of resting that works against the needs of our bodies. Anthropological evidence suggests that from at least 2 million years ago, and until the invention of chairs, our ancestors rested by squatting on their haunches, a position that is still common among young children, modern hunter-gatherers, and in cultures across Asia. For those who are used to it, squatting is a comfortable resting position, and has the added bonus that it keeps the hips, calves, and ankles mobile through the range of motion needed to walk, run, and otherwise move around in the world. Resting in chairs, however, does the opposite, causing us to stiffen up. A study last year by researchers at the University of Salford, UK, suggested that this has a real impact on range of motion. People who regularly sat for less than 4 hours a day and were generally active had 6 degrees more range of motion in their hip joints than less active people who sat for more than 7 hours. There is also evidence that sedentary lifestyles in general are having a knock-on effect on overall flexibility. A 2012 analysis by the U.S. Institute of Medicine in Washington, D.C. of data from the now-defunct Presidential Physical Fitness Test, which, between 1966 and 2012, included a sit and reach flexibility test for all U.S. school children, found that flexibility in young people had decreased over the decades, particularly among boys. By early middle age, the most sedentary people are so stiff that they can injure themselves even while sitting at a desk. We see that starting at age 30 or so, people get problems from non-sporting activities like moving the computer mouse, says Markus Tilp at the University of Graz in Austria, who studies stretching. What's more, it isn't just the physical act of sitting that leaves us feeling tight. Concentrating on a mental task contributes to tension in the shoulder girdle, arm, and neck. This is partly because when we focus our eyes on a screen, we often tense our shoulders to increase our ability to focus visually and mentally. One study found that the trapezius muscles in the upper back, which help keep the head upright, are particularly sensitive to the difficulty of the task. The more we need to concentrate, the more they tense up. For people who sit a lot and are under a lot of stress, then stretching and mobilizing stiff parts does relieve tension and lengthen muscles at least. It is also well known that, when done regularly, stretching can lengthen muscles and connective tissue, restoring their length and a full range of motion to underused joints. Which sounds like case closed. For the benefits of stretching, especially for those who feel their bodies are tight, weak, and inflexible. But this doesn't necessarily mean we should devote lots of time to stretching to get more flexible as part of an exercise regime. In fact, according to exercise scientist James Nuzzo, this type of stretching isn't worth the effort. Nuzzo says that the hype about stretching dates to 1980 when exercise scientists Charles Corbin and Larry Noble, then at Kansas State University, first made the case for its importance in overall health. They argued that flexibility was important to maintain posture and protect the back, while allowing the body freedom to move. Soon afterwards, the sit and reach test was incorporated into the first version of U.S. standardized physical fitness tests as a measure of flexibility, and the idea that stretching is the way to improve flexibility became entrenched in the popular consciousness. However, in his 2020 paper The Case for Retiring Flexibility as a Major Component of Physical Fitness, Nuzzo, then at the University of New South Wales in Australia, argues that, while maintaining a healthy range of motion is important, stretching has a reputation that far outstrips what it can actually do for our physical fitness. For a start, the degree of flexibility you need very much depends on what you plan to do with your body. Normal human movement only requires the hips to be sufficiently flexible to allow the legs to extend backwards to an angle of 30 degrees from upright. In other words, for everyday activities, you only really need the flexibility to get halfway to the splits, at most, and there is little reason to push your hips any further. Bending to extremes. Whitmarit kind of extreme flexibility that makes a great social media post can be more trouble than it is worth. As many as 20% of people have hypermobile joints, which extend further than the normal range. This can lead to physical problems, such as joint pain and dislocations, if the joint hasn't been strengthened throughout its full range. Most cases of joint hypermobility are inherited, caused by an unusually loose form of collagen, but some researchers think that certain types of extreme stretching dance training, for example, can lead to joint hypermobility and the problems this can cause. This suggests that a training regime with flexibility as its sole aim may not be such a good idea. Nuzzo's main problem with stretching, though, is that for our overall health it's largely a waste of time. There is not strong evidence that flexibility really correlates with a lot that's hugely important, he says. Cardiovascular fitness, muscle strength, and endurance all correlate with a lower risk mortality, argues. Flexibility, not so much. That isn't to say that we shouldn't aim to maintain a healthy range of motion, and to extend that range if necessary, says Nuzzo. People who spend most of the day sitting and then exercise in frantic bursts are at risk of doing themselves an injury if they don't take the time to maintain a useful range of motion. But he argues that there are better ways to achieve this goal than a dedicated stretching regime. We need to get out of our minds this notion that stretching exercise holds a monopoly on the lengthening of tendons and muscles, he says. It's not the only activity where flexibility or range of motion will improve when you do it for several weeks. Resistance training, in particular eccentric contractions, where muscles are loaded as they lengthen. For example, the lowering phase of a bicep curl or walking down the stairs, has the same effect on the muscles as pulling them into a stretch, he says. Doing this, you get strength as well as flexibility, with no need to tag on a series of stretches afterwards. If people only have a limited amount of time and you want to make them healthier, I would argue that taking up chunks of their workout time with lots of stretching is not a good use of their time. In fact, keeping the joints oiled doesn't need to involve anything that you might think of as exercise. Squatting onto your haunches when you need to reach something on the floor will release sitting-related tension without the need to contort your body into an official glute stretch. Reaching to grab something from a high shelf or playing frisbee will help free up the shoulders too. The benefits of choosing strong mobility over flexibility is that you get side benefits in terms of increased strength and endurance, which, unlike flexibility, are proven to bring significant benefits for overall health and longevity. Tilp also says itis, a lack of movement, rather than a lack of stretching per se, that causes us to stiffen up in the long term. We know that when you get older, you become less flexible. But if you move your joints through the whole range of motion, that just keeps the flexibility, he says. Tilp 2 recommends prioritizing strength throughout the whole range of motion of the joint. Active stretches, such as yoga poses that involve holding your body weight in a stretched position, like a downward dog, strengthen and stretch muscles at the same time. You have not only the flexibility but also strengthening, he says. But don't abandon your flexibility training just yet. Not only can it help prevent sporting injuries, it has surprising benefits for the cardiovascular system as well. Over the past decade or so, studies have revealed a link between flexibility and risk factors for cardiovascular disease. For instance, a 2009 study of Japanese adults led by Kenta Yamamoto at the National Institute of Health and Nutrition in Tokyo found that the stiffest participants, as measured by a sit-and-reach test, aged 40 or over, had stiffer arteries, and this effect was independent of the aerobic fitness levels of the participants. What's more, a 2018 study of 1354 Japanese men aged 35 to 59 found that the least flexible, as measured by the sit-and-reach test, plus range of movement in the shoulder and arm, showed the highest levels of atherosclerosis, the build up of plaque in the arteries, which is another risk factor for cardiovascular disease. This implies that it may be possible to improve our cardiovascular health via a regime of stretching, or at least by keeping our joints and muscles oiled. A growing number of studies show that this is indeed the case. In 2008, researchers from the University of Texas at Austin were investigating whether strength training could reduce arterial stiffness. Their control group undertook a mild stretching program, holding stretches of all the major muscle groups for 20 seconds, 3 days a week for 13 weeks. The unexpected finding was that strength training had no effect, whereas stretching reduced arterial stiffness by 23%. Or unexpected benefits. Another Japanese study found that middle-aged people who carried out a 4-week regime of static stretches of all the major muscle groups had significantly reduced arterial stiffness. The mechanism behind this effect is still a mystery, though there are a number of proposed explanations. One is that improving the elastic properties of our skeletal muscle also improves the elasticity of our blood vessels. Another is that atherosclerosis is an inflammatory condition, which is somehow alleviated by the physiological effects of stretching. Evidence for this comes from studies of the fascia, the layers of connective tissue that surround muscles and allow them to slide over each other. Long thought to be nothing more than nature's version of plastic wrap, the fascia are known to be biologically active and may play an important role in the management of inflammation. Experiments by Helene Langevin and Charles Sirhan, then both at Harvard University, show that when samples of rats' fascia are gently stretched, cells within the tissue rearrange to become flatter and longer, whilst secreting anti-inflammatory molecules. These studies have revealed that stretching injured tissue speeds up healing and increases levels of chemicals called resolvins that are made by the body to turn off the inflammation response. That suggested that the stretching helped the body to resolve the inflammation. It helped the natural process, says Langevin. She also stresses that, while stretching may be beneficial, extreme bendiness is likely to be surplus to requirements. Just stretching until you feel it is probably enough, she says. In fitness class, it's easy to get fixated on the bendy people at the front, but there is no need to go to extremes to get the benefits of flexibility. What is most important for physical well-being is ensuring to exercise our body's full range of movement, and this doesn't necessarily require a stretching routine at the gym. And although such regimes can help prevent sports injuries, there are side benefits for our cardiovascular system too. Putting your leg behind your head? Science seasoned.